stories turn songs into symphonies, events into memories, and lives into legends. In our crowded world, knowing your story cuts through the noise so you can make your mark, whether you want to sell more books, increase profits, or just make a difference. At Sterling & Stone, story is our business. The Story Studio podcast is where we explore ways we can all tell our stories better. And now, with the Story Studio podcast number 9, here's Johnny, Sean, and Dave.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Today we're going to talk about our things we would do differently in our. Well, we're going to talk about the duality of any story, basically. So, we've published 100 plus books in a bunch of different franchises, and we're going to talk about the ways that we launched those and handled them, and how we would do them differently. Like what were the good things, what were the bad things, a little bit of postmortem.
Yeah, this is every story is context, right? So once a month, Johnny and I, we used to have longer weekly meetings, and we've cut those down because we're trying to get just more efficient on our schedule. And we looked at it and thought, you know what, we could probably do a better job if we meet once a month or for all day, and then just have 1 hour meetings per week.
And the 1 hour meetings per week contain no story anymore. They used to be pure story meetings for hours on end.
And we may actually need to rethink that because
need to rethink that.
Yeah,
we need story meetings.
Yeah, it's been a little dry on that. We just get through our business stuff, and so the 1 hour or the 1 day ones always start with a trip to the accountant. And
no, they don't. Every once in a while, they do.
The last one did not. The last one we actually got a movie, and it was awesome. But we. The whole idea of going to these meetings is just to, well, okay. So the last time we went to the accountant, he showed us like our year in review, and one way it looked not so good, and then he clicked a button and all the numbers changed. Like nothing actually changed.
If you turn the chart upside down, right, that downward trend goes up.
The context around the numbers changed and told a totally different story. Same numbers, but the context changed, and now it looks this way. And so that's really fascinating.
There's the story we're going to tell the IRS and the story that's real. No, not really. That's not really what we're doing.
It's not two separate sets of books. That's a different thing.
Right.
This is the exact same information, but how you tell it. It's like if you have Haley was on debate last year, and her schedule just got too full, and she didn't.
Isn't Haley always on debate?
Yes. Haley,
that's what she needs, the debate class.
No, she was really good at it, and it's like I never did debate, but like I would have dug that. And the whole idea that you're taking the same information and you have to argue either side. That's, as storytellers, we should be able to do that, right? We should be able to tell the villain story as well as the heroes. We should be able to flip the context for anything. But as storytellers and business people, we really want to have that skill. We want to be able to take anything that happens and figure out what the good is there, because there's always good. And anybody who works in Sterling & Stone knows that, we make mistakes and bad stuff happens, but we 100% of the time try to flip that upside down and figure out what can we walk away so this doesn't happen again. Johnny has been very fond of saying for the last 6 months or so, okay, whatever mistake we're going to make, fine. I don't care. But never
I've been saying it longer than that. Yeah, it's been okay as long as we don't make that mistake again. It's a freebie. It's like a speeding ticket. Like you get your first speeding ticket, in theory, a lot of times they'll just give you a warning, but you don't get 2. It's the same thing. Like just as long as we don't make the same mistake twice.
And we've been excellent internally about not making the same mistake twice.
Or your first murder. I mean, every now and then.
Right. You get one freebie.
Right. You get one freebie. That's it. And so we've really tried to not make the same mistakes, but I think that we're able to do that because we take a step back and we actually talk about, our mistakes, and we figure out what's good from this situation, what's bad from this situation, what is the thing that we want to repeat, and what is the thing we never want to do again. And so that seems like
Old Navy.
That seems like a really I don't know, a good breeding ground for conversation. So we talked last time about how we would talk about our 3 biggest successes and failures, but it was funny. I love these first 15 minutes that we have now before we start the show, where we're talking and kind of getting warm together, the 3 of us, and talking about what we'll talk about. And all three of us had a different idea about what the show topic today meant. And so Dave came all prepared. He's like, I got us. We're talking about Yesterday's Gone. And I said, wait, what? And and so we ended up talking about a lot of different things and thought, actually, that's a pretty good angle. What are, all these different things have pluses and minuses. Every project that we were pitching has pluses and minuses. So what are those pluses and minuses?
We also, during our day where we got to watch a movie and hang out and talk story, Sean said, do you think when Dave moves here that he'll want to be part of this or he'll be disgusted by it? When Nate meet with our hands
and talking about it?
Well, you don't want to sit next to us at the movies.
I can sit a seat away. I just don't want to sit in your lap.
And we ate.
I'm big. I need my arm.
We ate meat with our fingers. And
we did eat it with our fingers.
Oh yeah, that I just closed my eyes for that.
We also shared popcorn.
No, I didn't have any of it.
Oh, that's right. But we usually do. And Dave, the meat was not very good, and we drove a long time for it. So, it was fine.
I would love, when I go to the movies with my wife, I'm like, you like the movie? And she's like, yeah. And that's it. She doesn't really talk about this. She doesn't care about the other stuff. She's whether she liked it or not. So yeah, I would love to actually be able to talk about all the different elements of the story.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but we saw Annihilation, and there was a lot to talk about in that movie. So.
I definitely like Kate's idea here, a new podcast, Dave versus the movies. If he moves here, we could go to the movies every week, and then Dave could, like, the first 15 minutes is him ranting about the experience of going to the movies, and then we get to the show.
Shit, my Dave says, like that. All right,
like
so
MST3K.
So moving into the idea here. So I believe Dave already has extensive notes about sort of the pluses and minuses, things that we did right. Well, not me, but that the company and Sean and Dave did right with Yesterday's Gone, their first big property. So do you want to kind of kick us off there?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things we did right is we did serials before pretty much anybody else was doing them. Not that we invented them, obviously, but when I had the first idea to do a serial, it was one of those things where, like, I'm looking on, because I like to know who's done stuff before. Like, I want to know how safe a bet this is. I'm a very cautious guy. So I'm doing my research, and everything I'm seeing from authors at the time, especially self-published authors, do not do serials.
It's your wife texting hi.
She's saying hi.
No, it's my alarm.
No, okay.
Okay.
Oh, you don't want to sleep past 3:30.
And by your alarm, you mean just your general sense of awareness.
No, because I had to pick up my wife the other day, and I set it for every day for some reason. Anyway, okay, so
you like to see what people are doing, and they said don't do serials.
Well, yeah, no, everything I saw, people saying serials are a horrible idea. They'll never sell. They'll never sell on Kindle. I'm like, Kindle.
To me, that's one of the best reasons to do it, because
to me, Kindle seems made for it.
Yeah, you just just because nobody else is doing it, figure out if the idea is there, you figure out how to make it work. And I think that what we did, it wasn't that we approached it as serials. I think the main thing we got right with Yesterday's Gone, we were early for sure. So that gave us a leg up that we would not have had later. But also we changed the language. That was our pivot. That was our move. We saw, how do we explain this? I mean, because a lot of the criticisms that people had of that strategy were right. Well, people don't want to read a book chopped up. Yeah, neither do we. We don't want to chop a book up, actually, right? So we listened to things like that and said, how do we address those objections? Well, make sure they know they're not buying a book. That's why we call it an episode. And that's when we can bind them together with a funnel. For a season. Well, but that's what made that. It took our idea that we want to write serials, and then how do you make that work? And that's part of the idea here, is that some ideas are bound to fail, but maybe that's because you're not approaching it right, or because you need that failure to have a really exponential success somewhere else. And Yesterday's Gone taught us so many lessons. And it's funny because if you look 6 years later, the lessons that we followed with Yesterday's Gone continue to breed success for us, and the ones that we ignored continue to breed failure, and over. So
what are those that continue to breed success or failure, respectively?
Dave, do you want to start with some negatives, or I mean,
yeah. Okay. Well,
Well, he always does.
Well, I know that's why.
Right.
I'd rather talk about the happy things. He wants to talk about the negatives.
well, I had specific things that I would change if I was doing Yesterday's Gone today. Do we
I
not
mean,
wanna talk
as
about-
far as like narrative structure?
Yeah. Well, I would improve the writing, obviously, because we wrote that several years ago.
Yeah.
I would seed things in because we were making it up as we went along. I mean, we had some ideas of where we wanted to go, like at the end of this first season, but we were writing episode to episode and
With no eye on the horizon that early.
I would change things, like I would give like Brent, the character of Brent, I would give him a bit more agency, as well as some of the female characters.
A little more of a spine.
Well, just where they're actually making more choices rather than everything being dictated to them. I felt that was kind of is how it felt. I don't know if I'm correct. I mean, I haven't read it in a long time, but
Well, the criticism of Brent, and I don't disagree, is that he's a little bit soft. He's kind of whiny. He's a little bit of a pessimist.
based on me though.
You can read that. I mean, but the problem is there's no. Yesterday's Gone goes some very specific places that we would have had no idea back then, and we weren't really breaking down or breaking out story like the company has learned to do. Like right now, we're developing a few what I would call pilots. Just like Yesterday's Gone season 1 or episode 1 even. And we're putting a lot of attention into the pilot itself, running through, outline after outline, make sure it's touched several places in the company. There's nothing going to, press without Bonnie giving it a thorough story jacket, right? So there's just a lot of, we're making sure our character arcs are there, but we would not have had the ability, the budget, the knowledge, nothing to execute that 6 years ago. So that's a good example of how if we could do it all again with the tools and systems we have now, it would be a completely different product. But I also know that we would never be able to build the product now had we not started back then.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest lessons I learned at some point, I don't remember when, was to have a self-contained story within the season, so there is some reward for people. Like the biggest criticism of the first book is
a fair criticism too.
Yeah, is that it ends without really a whole lot happening or much closure of anything. And at the time it was intentional, but I think we could go back and do it in a way where there was a little bit more closure and you felt like you had a whole story there rather than, okay, it continues next time and it's a whole new book. So I think season 2 ended on a nice note. I mean, that gave some closure in a very negative.
Season 2 is still one of my favorite cliffhangers we've ever done. It's really awesome. The big lesson that I wish that we had maintained. It was a really positive lesson to learn, and we just fell off. Was that writing for a live engaged audience is pretty much the best fuel you could possibly have for selling books. And once we unplug from that, we never quite plug back in. And so that's something that, if we went back in time, it would have been nice to just build it from the beginning so that it was more sustainable and not just like, because there were other ways we could have done that. We could have figured it out.
Gave us some padding.
Yeah, giving ourselves breathing room.
However, if we were that far ahead, we really wouldn't be writing live. We would be. You can do things about it. It's just a matter of smart structuring. Like, look what we're doing with Storatorium. So the one we recorded yesterday was live and responding immediately to an audience. The ones we had before that were recorded a few weeks before, and we'll be able to get ahead again. So you have those pockets where you need to be live and responsive, but a lot of your planning can be done. It's a matter of what do you want, what are your goals, and then how do you create that structure? And we weren't thinking in those terms at all. We were thinking, how can we write another 15,000 words and publish them this week and get a cover and an edit? Like, we were just going so ridiculously fast in those days. Now we go fast, but in very different, more decisive ways. So that's the big takeaway that I wish we had pulled away from that. But there was so much that we learned as far as writing for speed, writing for a live audience. Okay. Can I pick the next one? Because I want
to underscore one more thing before you leave Yesterday's Gone.
Yeah, of
and
course.
that's that there's obviously a too far point on this, and we've actually seen people talk about what I feel is over the line on this, but there's a lot of value to just shipping, right? Like there's a lot of value to you didn't get everything together, but you got started. Like there's a ton of value to that.
Yeah, because you can't iterate otherwise. I mean, we talk about that all the time. On the other hand, if you want to test the market and not ruin your name, you can always just ship with a pen name and test that. I know that's something Dave probably wishes that he had done from the very beginning, is run with a pen name. We've talked about that. I still like using my name for the stories I write, but there is a lot to be said for that. My next one was Whitespace, which was actually the first time, because we wrote Yesterday's Gone, and then we wrote for Nevermore, and then we wrote Whitespace, and that was kind of the end of an era, because shortly after that I started writing with Johnny. I found my mistress,
and then it was all
Johnny
over.
Ruined everything,
and then it was all over. But I really loved Whitespace. Whitespace is actually not on audio, but it's what got Podium's attention, and then they went and made Yesterday's Gone and never made Whitespace because we didn't finish it off. So the bad thing there is that it was something that we started doing more and more, not just as CI, but as a company. Realm and Sands actually was even worse at it, which was starting projects and then starting new projects without finishing the old projects. So Whitespace has
a big chunk of that was because of we got signed to 47 North.
Yes.
Derailed everything.
It derailed everything. Yes, if we could go back in time, we would never take that deal. But whatever. Like, again, we learned. So with Whitespace, it was the first time that we were really approaching the craft as producers and thinking, you know what, this show could get made someday. So let's think about that. In Yesterday's Gone, there's these big set pieces. We were just thinking in terms of author. Times Square is emptied, but crawling with aliens. Like, that's kind of hard to shoot, right? So that dictates a certain budget if you're going to be loyal to the material.
Unless you use dolls like that fan did.
That was pretty awesome. But Whitespace, we thought about location scouting for the first time. We were very intentional about our setting for that show. And that was really a fun way to approach it. And that's stuck with us through many, many, many projects since.
Is that the entirety of that one? Do you have more?
Yeah, that's an easy one. But I think the best thing is the location scouting. And the worst thing from that project was knowing that, like, you can't back down when something's working, because that series really resonated with our audience at the time. A lot of people said they liked it better than Yesterday's Gone. And then we got, right to the 2/3 way, and then we just dropped it. And I think that really hurt us, not just because we dropped a hot property that people cared about, but we broke a promise. And it was the most important promise that we had made to the readers up to that point. And it's been 5 years. So we are going to revisit it. We're almost like we're inches away from tapping back into that. But yeah, that's the best and worst from that project.
Daddy left you. Get used to it. Disappointment is forever.
That's that in your author's note?
That's what we told our audience.
So, Johnny, you want to pick one?
Yeah, mine would be, I'm going to pick a property, but I'm also going to, the property is representative of a larger issue / choice we made, because you could see this is one of those classic double-sided blades. And the property I'm going to go with is actually Unicorn Western. If you're new to us, yes, we wrote a book called Unicorn Western. And I could say an all-encompassing way, because although Dave wasn't involved in the writing, he was the inspiration for it.
Unicorn Western would not exist without Dave, neither would Fat Vampire.
Right.
Just
two things we were talking to some people about recently. And
I am your muse. I am your fat fucking muse.
Right.
You are our muse, Dave. It's very true. Not just ours, but I think many people in this community.
Many people's muse. So anyway, we Unicorn Western was the first book that Sean and I worked on together. And it came out of, like you said, a joke at Dave's expense, the idea of writing. We could write a Western and we could just stick a unicorn in it and have his guns fire pink smoke. And so it was kind of a lark and a joke in that way. And for that reason, we took it seriously as a project, but we also didn't really take it seriously. We were like, this is just kind of fun and who cares? And after we wrote the first one, we're like, okay, I'd kind of like to write another one of those. And fast forward a little bit. By the time we were done, we wrote 9 little 25 to 30,000 word books, and then combined them into a giant epic that's 250,000 words long plus. A 250,000 word joke at Dave's expense, basically. And because of its origins and because of the slow evolution of it, we kind of didn't realize what that property was going to become. And what it became was, believe it or not, if you haven't read it, kind of epic. Like it doesn't have.
It's still one of my favorite things I've ever been involved with.
Right. It doesn't have a lot of the tropes of like classic fantasy. It's definitely not classic fantasy, but it is kind of Dark Tower style fantasy. And it has that scope, and it's kind of the whole world, like the whole world does hang in balance, or worlds, as it were. And the point I'm trying to make here is that the good was that we stretched ourselves and that we weren't afraid we didn't feel bound by genre conventions. The bad side, the flip side of this, and the thing that we need to be careful of, I wouldn't say avoid, but be careful of, not just in individual properties, but across everything we do, is the fact that it didn't obey genre conventions, and hence makes it very difficult to classify and very difficult to explain and sell to its ideal people. So, like I said, I chose a property, I chose a series, but it's representative of our whole catalog. The first projects that Sean and I worked on together were Unicorn Western, which is, I just described it, it's a fantasy Western mashup that was kind of funny at the beginning, became epic. The Beam, which is hard sci-fi. Cursed, which is pure horror, essentially. It's like shapeshifter horror. 3 individual little comedies, for want of a better term, and a revenge thriller called Namaste. And I don't think I'm missing any, but that's kind of
No,
like...
you're missing 2. Robot Proletariat.
Oh, yes. Which became The Inevitable, which is being re-envisioned now.
Which is now a huge, huge, huge world. And Adult Video.
Well, adult video came a little later, but yes, I mean, that's the sort of thing we did. Like, we hit all these different genres under the same names. And for Unicorn Western in particular, it's kind of multiple genres in one book. Is it a Western? Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? Is it humor? And the plus and minus of this, just the double-edged sword thing, is on the negative side, it did make it very hard to sell, especially in the short term. We actually originally said, it's a Western, but it's got a unicorn. And it became apparent that we needed to position it both in cover and in description.
Because no person who likes Westerns is going to dig that. I mean, that's not true. Not no person, but
most people, like a Louis L'Amour reader, is not going to be interested.
Yeah,
in this.
if you're into reading Westerns and you see that book, it's going to piss you off. But if you like irreverent, it's
or a fantasy reader, we thought might be more forgiving because it is fantasy as well. And it's like, you know, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter, but it's more acceptable to get a Western into your fantasy than to get a unicorn into your Western.
Yeah, and if we had just continued to write stuff like Unicorn Western, I'm sure we would have developed a name and that would have blown up. But we didn't. We went and wrote The Beam immediately after Unicorn Western, and the 2 properties have 0 in common except voice.
Right.
And so for us, that voice became something that we were just really allegiant to. And we said, you know what? People go see, Schindler's List and Jurassic Park, both by Spielberg. That's what we're going to do. And that was a very expensive decision for our bank accounts, but I think an amazing investment in our creative adaptability. And I think we're really agile. And that's because I think we dabbled so much. And also just for me on a personal level, writing with Johnny at that time gave me all the juice, all the confidence that I needed to kind of take that next step. Because like I had tried the production model before. You know, there were a few properties out there, including The Beam, that I had this model, I thought it would work, and I couldn't quite get the quality up to where it was, where I needed it to be to sell. And Unicorn Western was really fun and it got really good. And then when we decided to go to The Beam, that was rewarding because Johnny just killed that draft. And these ideas that were already there in one time before that kind of like didn't bear fruit and made me feel disappointed were so beautifully articulated. And that made me feel like, okay, I can write with this guy forever. And that's important. And we can write anything, which is great because for like a crazy mad scientist person like me who wants to just write everything, that's a really great partner, right? And then also just to know that that I'm going to be able to figure out this production model at some point in the future, because yes, it's going to work. These are outlines. And to Johnny's point on Unicorn Western, one of the things that we really got out of that is the beat process, which now is a much, 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 much more involved thing than it was. But
that's the way we plan stories, if you're new to us.
Yeah, and it was much more evolved because of its simplicity. So this was a good example of the evolution from the way that Dave and I worked, which was just kind of figuring it out project to project, and then moving over to this new environment where Johnny's like more of an optimizer. He wants to tweak everything. And so we were looking for the most efficient way to tell the Unicorn Western story. And so back then that meant they were all based on a real Western. So the first one is based on High Noon. So we watched High Noon and we deconstructed High Noon and told our version of High Noon with a unicorn in it.
Unabashedly, I will mention there's a chapter in the first book called High Noon.
High Noon. And all
the
their
second
names
book is based on the Searchers, and the chapter called The Searchers. Getting the 310 to Yuma was the hardest.
But we did it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're all patterned after a specific Western. And that gave us early fences that really helped us to develop these systems. And it is crazy to see 6 years later how refined they have become, but they all started with these early projects.
Well, if I could just go ahead and really elaborate the pro and con, because I didn't fully close the loop on that, is with Unicorn Western, we didn't really decide on a path. We tried to walk them all. And with our catalog, we didn't decide on a path. We tried to walk them all. And Dave said, "That's ridiculous. What's the matter with you guys?" And on one hand, we can sing the Dave was right jingle. And
Dave was right.
And I want that professionally produced at some point. Jim, can you handle that for us? And on the other side, it wasn't the wrong thing to do, because what it did is, in the short term, we cost ourselves a ton of money and exposure and all that stuff. We could have been much further along, but it's a little like you can't pigeonhole somebody who won't stay in one place at the very start. Like if we had done the beam, stuff like that, and we had done it for years and it was very successful, then we would be the guys who did the beam, and the next time we tried to do something different or odd, we couldn't, because we'd be the beam guys. So by
what the hell is this unicorn thing? I want sci-fi, damn it.
So by being scattershot from the beginning, it's allowing us to be kind of the people who make the offbeat odd projects. Who's the guy who did Annihilation, Sean? You were talking about this.
Alex Garland?
Yeah, and he did, what was the other movie? It was
Ex Machina?
Yeah, Ex Machina. So that kind of, like, those are, I mean, they're within a genre, but they're genre defying. They're like kind of out there. And you could say this about a lot of directors.
Yeah, and he wrote the script for 28 Days Later. He's
or like Charlie Kaufman. You have somebody who does just kind of weird offbeat things, and they only earn that by doing them relentlessly and from the beginning, Yeah,
so, and the mistake is to never learn from it. So what did we learn? We learned that we're really not going to get the trajectory that we need unless we start figuring out how to sell ourselves. And the best way to do that is to figure out what our common denominators are, so we can figure out what kind of storytellers we are. And so after many books, Johnny and I have a very firm understanding of what kind of stories we have, to where we can use realm and sands as an adjective, and we both immediately know what it means.
Annihilation was very realm and sands.
It was very realm and sands. And so we're able to put a finer target on that. And that means writing books that resonate with us more, having more fun with those projects, and then ultimately being able to sell them because they have a clear understanding.
Yeah, I'll go one step farther on that. So this isn't going to apply to a lot of people, but this is inside our process, and I think that it really says a lot, is two things. So number one, for Realm and Sands, for Sean and I, because we are kind of all over the place, because we do have kind of an off-kilter voice, or something that's, we do tend to go deep, we do tend to kind of explore weird concepts. And so rather than a genre defining us, rather than saying we write books that are hard science fiction or that are fantasy or that are romances or whatever, we can't use genre because we don't have a common genre. So we learned we need to identify with a voice. So a reader who's interested in our voice and our style is going to stick with us regardless of genre. And so it's just a harder thing to do. So we say like we're Michael Crichton, Christopher Nolan, Alex Garland, right? Like that's the kind of thing that we make. It can't be explained in a normal way. And the other flip side of this is that Sean and I, again, I think that Sean and Dave have less of this problem, but Sean and I have decided that we can't really write commercial stuff together. It just can't be done. We've tried a bunch of times. We have pen names that you guys don't know about that we've tried to kind of whore out as much as possible and write the most commercial thing we could possibly do, and it doesn't work. We always go too deep, and we always do it. Like the audience wants something simpler or they want something more straightforward, and we complicate it. So for us, we decided that given our structure, we needed to have our cake and eat it too. We can't do it in one place. So we need to write the kind of books we're going to write and accept that they're going to boil a lot slower, and then lean into a production model where we're working with other writers to write the commercial stuff so that we don't starve in the meantime.
Dave, do you have another plus and minus project?
For Nevermore?
Okay, what's your, well, actually the negative on this one's easy. It's like legendary in the company. It's become an example that we use. Oh, don't for Nevermore that. So do you want to talk about what don't for Nevermore that means?
Yes, when we wrote for Nevermore, well, first of all, I think maybe it was a mistake to write that after Yesterday's Gone, because it was a young adult sort of dark fantasy genre.
There's no bad words in it. There's a few things dark thematically, but it's very PG-13 compared to our hard R of Yesterday's Gone.
But the irony is that what you just said, I was about to be like, unless you're Elman Sands, and then you just do it anyway.
Well, right. Okay. So here's the problem with that. It's not that we did that. It's that we had the worst of both worlds, because with Realm and Sands, we're all over the place, and that's fine. That's to be expected. We're actually hopping genres. We're going from Unicorn Western to the Beam, which is a really loud thing. So what we did at the Inkwell is we went from Yesterday's Gone to For Nevermore, which could be the same. The same person could like both of those, but we didn't capitalize on any of the strengths of staying within the same sphere. We got all the bad from it. We basically, actually, Dave, go back.
Well, I think if we had come out with, if Available Darkness had taken off and we'd gone from that to For Nevermore, that would have been a better transition because it's similar, or more similar. I think we basically, when we told our audience about it, we were almost apologetic, like, okay, this is young adult, and we all know, a lot of young adult sucks, and I swear ours is different, and doing that front-loaded it, which basically, we probably offended people that did like young adult and didn't think it sucked, and the people that hated young adult, they're like, well, yeah, I'm not giving it. Yeah, it's not my thing. It's not my chocolate. So, we also told them what to expect, so that when they read the book, they would say like, oh, well, there's too much teen drama here, which they may not have said if it wasn't, hey, we're going to give you this young adult. We promise you're going to like it.
You can't pre-frame it like that.
We pre-framed it. We apologized. We did everything wrong. And then the hilarious thing here is that we actually repeated this mistake almost exactly the same with Alexi launch like a while later. That was just stupid. It was stupid. We were basically apologizing for a book and alienating the people who would like it and not doing anything to win over the people who would. And it was just stupid. So that's one that we made twice, but you try not to.
We weren't saying we can't make the same mistakes twice back then. I will not make the mistake of not saying that we can't make the same mistakes
Well, to be fair,
twice.
Sean and I made that mistake, and you and Sean made it. I mean, that is
fair.
And it was more my mistake on the For Nevermore end.
So Sean's the only one who made it twice.
Oh, yes. Fuck me. That's terrible. Okay. Well, I know we need to close, but there's a big one I'd like to hit is Invasion, which Invasion was interesting for us because it was the first one where we were trying to kind of engineer a hit. which I think is interesting in the context of this conversation because it shows the learning. So, Johnny and I had done all of our, throw crap against the wall for, the first few years. And it was like, all right, that was fun. But I think our wives would like to not be stressed out all the time. let's pull some money into this company and, write some really hot fiction. And so Invasion was always engineered to be a hit. Now, having said that, we still did a very Realm and Sands job of it.
And not intentionally. We wanted to, we were swinging the bat looking for the fences with a hit, and we didn't realize that we were putting weights on that bat, if I'm going to extend the metaphor, like doing weird shit, right?
Yeah, and Invasion was it was a monster hit for us. It did really well. It continues to do well. And we're very happy with how Invasion has done for us. It basically has ticked all of its goals. But what I would fix, there's a few things there that just aren't quite right. I do think it's a 5-book series that takes 7 books to tell.
Maybe even 3.
So I wish that wasn't the case, because I think there'd be a much stronger story there. But I think the world is rich and the characters are rich. And
it's not that there's anything wrong with the books. What we mean by that is that we have increasingly embraced the idea that brevity, it tends to be powerful. Like we sprawl.
Yeah, but that was one of those things where 7-book series at the time were doing well. And so we engineered it around 7 books. And if we had, really been honest to the story first and not to the funnel, we would have broken those down and said, okay, well, hold on, this should happen, then this should happen, then this should happen. 3, there's a lot of story there. Probably 3 is too few, but maybe not. 5 is definitely feels good. 7 is absolutely 2 books too many, and we didn't need it. And there's parts of me that really wish we could go back and tighten that up. But I wouldn't do things to make it more commercial. I would do things to make it more homogenous. But I'm actually happy with the story and the characters, and I wouldn't want to change that. So for those of you who don't know, it's spoiler alert, there are no aliens in Invasion. They show up at the very, very end.
Well, they're there, but they're in ships. Like you're right. They're approaching. We don't see.
Invasion doesn't happen until after the Invasion book.
Yes, the invasion does not happen until the epilogue, but that was always there's 2 things.
That's why I didn't want to do the story originally, by the way.
Yeah, this was originally a CI pitch for 47 North, and it was always very TV in my head, and it had a very certain flavor. And the first Invasion book is exactly what I always pictured. But after that, it's just that we didn't quite know the story we were going to tell. We just knew how many books we were going to tell it in and where it would kind of go and end. And so that's, I think, a faulty premise to start world building.
Yep. All right. So that was cool. The next episode, we're going to talk about, I help me with the framing on this, because I sort of have why you can't always be the hero of your own story. We wanted to
I like that framing. So this was born approximately an hour ago before we were starting this show, and we all came with a different approach. And the approach that I had for this episode was our 3 biggest, our from each one of us. So what is our biggest failure that we turned into a success, something that over time we had to conquer, and it made us a better person and the company better as a whole.
Well, I hope I have a failure I turn into a success during the next week. Otherwise, I'll have nothing to talk about.
No, well, Dave, hold on. I'm not going to let you shit on yourself like that. Yeah. You absolutely have things that you have turned on.
Yeah, a ton. I was like, when you came today and you're like, I'm prepared to talk, yesterday's gone. I'm like, dude, I got shit for you. This will be awesome. So yeah, I think you'll do great next week.
So thank you for listening to the Story Studio podcast, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Story Studio podcast. Are you wondering what the ever-growing demand for superb storytelling skills means for your future? Check out our latest interview as Johnny and Sean dive deep into that question in Storytelling is the Future, How to Build on Your Self-Publishing Success. Download the interview from the info box or show notes in YouTube, or head over to sterlingandstone.net/future.